I would like to welcome our participants to day three, the final day of the 26th annual African American, and Caribbean Studies Summer Institute. I would like to bring you our keynote speaker as we continue our discussions and conversations around educational transformation, integrating African and African American studies from contributions to social action. When we're talking about educational transformation, I know I've brought the right brother to discuss that. We're bringing to you, and we have the honor to have Chris Chatmon from Oakland, California. Brother Chris is passionate about uplifting the African American community and has dedicated his career and his life to creating pathways of success within Oakland and also beyond Oakland. Presently, Brother Chris serves as the Senior Advisor of Equity, Diversion, and Inclusion for Oakland Unified School District, and that's going to be through June. He's previously served as the Executive Director for African American Male Achievement and also the Deputy Chief of Equity for Oakland Unified School District. Recently, Chris is starting to devote his energy and directed his energies towards co-founding the Kingmakers of Oakland. It's a nonprofit organization committed to improving life outcomes for Black boys. Brother Chris has also been named as a leader to learn from by Educational Week magazine and also selected as a campaign for Black Male Achievement Social Innovation Accelerator for his tireless and his commitment to improving life outcomes for all youth, especially African American males. So without further ado, I want to pass the mic to my brother Chris as he brings his message to us all around educational transformation.
Ashe. Thank you, Brother Brian. We're going to go ahead and begin with the introduction off our soundtrack, Kings in the Making, and then I'll jump in with the program.
Do you know who you are? There's a lot of people on the planet that know exactly who you are, but do you know who you are? We actually know who you are. We see you. We love you. You are the original kings. And I want you to know that in the Ethiopian language, the Ethiopian Semitic language, the word for king was N-E-G-U-S, Negus. So we're not the other N word, but this N word, right? There are thousands of men that have your back. There's thousands of Black men that have your back. We work for you every day. We out here in these streets, and we'll forever have you in the spirit of our ancestors, in the spirit of all those that came before us. We pour that into you. We love you.
You stand tall because you stand on the shoulders of those who came before you. Acknowledge the past in order to understand the future.
Rise up.
Gotta start with something.
Greetings, everybody. We fundamentally believe that all Black boys are brilliant, beautiful, and possess innate greatness. Black males are not the problem. The systems, the structures, the conditions, and the culture is. Greetings, my name is Chris Chatmon. I'm the founding executive director of African American Male Achievement for Oakland Unified School District. I have also served in several other capacities, was the first deputy chief of the Office of Equity for Oakland Unified School District, which launched several other targeted strategies such as African American Female Excellence, Latino Student Achievement, Asian Pacific Islander Student Achievement, which was a very different approach to equity versus compliance. It was really bringing those furthest away from opportunity into the center, elevating their voice and allowing them really to design how the system would ultimately be in service of those students. It's an honor to be with you all today. I'm going to share a little history and then talk about two of the drivers of change, really to dismantle institutions of oppression that really inoculate Black boys while we do the legacy work of reimagining a system in service of our kings and queens. So talk a little bit about strategy, then the two drivers that we go deep in around youth leadership, strategic communication, and narrative change. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the implications and path ahead. But first, to give some context, we want to show you a video off of the groundbreaking work that we launched in Oakland some 10 years ago of African American male achievement. So I want to go ahead and show this with you all.
I was just walking down my neighborhood like I do every day. Someone walked up to me, asked me what gang am I from. But as I'm looking at him, I see him reaching for something. I immediately put my hands up. I'm not trying to die. So he points it at me. He looks at me, he puts it away, and he keeps walking. I think I dodged a bullet. My days are not promised, so that could have been the end of my life right there. From 6th grade to 8th, I changed a lot, but my transformation has been great. My average GPA in 6th grade was a 2.8. Now it's a 3.8, and now I'm on student council. If I didn't have MVP, I don't know where I'd be. They feel like that I'm a threat to them, basically. Like I'm not gonna be handling my business. It's not gonna be a 3.0 student. It changed because they finally know who I really am. They don't really just receive me as a black male.
Teaches you about being in boyhood to manhood, which is like almost the greatest level. The actual greatest level is being a king, and teaching you not to get caught up in the media or the matrix. So when I become a scientist, I want to be a biologist and chemistry scientist, and I want to cure cancer, and maybe after that cure some more stuff.
Who are you? I'm a king, and you? A kingmaker, the AAMA way, live in the bay. Welcome to our world, come see what's good. It's deeper than a class, it's really a brotherhood. Who are you? I'm a king, and you? A kingmaker, the AAMA way, live in the bay. Welcome to our world, come see what's good. It's deeper than a class, it's really a brotherhood. Gentlemen, come and take a seat. It's a class where the past of the Kingmakers meet. At the end of the day, this is face the last breathe. Let the noise out there motivate to move a feet like go get 'em. Met a couple brothers, we go chillin'. Talking about the egg they gon' give us this whole system. We in here, ain't no victim. How you gonna battle an army alone? Gotta try for the family, so I'm always at home. And when we separated, on the business is shown. And if you hear any noises in the beat, boys like, whoa. On who we rap, man? On who we rap, man? Clap it up for yourself. Who are you? I'm a king, and you? A kingmaker, the AAMA way, live in the bay. Welcome to our world, come see what's good. It's deeper than a class, it's really a brotherhood. A brotherhood, a brotherhood.
Kingmakers is here to stay. The website, please check us out at kingmakersofoakland.org. But that foundational revolutionary work of being intentional and unapologetic around the needs of Black boys started 10 years ago in Oakland Unified School District. But I would be remiss. We were able to do what we do because Oakland is on fertile soil. So definitely want to be able to acknowledge the Panther Party, Dr. Wade Nobles, Asa Hilliard, the National NAACP, Bay Area, the Urban League, and so many others, heroes and sheroes that dealt with far more with far less. And so we are able to do what we do because we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. And so the baton was passed, we took it, we grabbed it, and now here we are today building with folks in West Palm Beach. And really now is the time. And so as I move forward into this presentation, it is important to know we are at a moment of time that there really is no one agent of change within the institutions of oppression that we call public school systems, that we have to hit the system at every level, from student to family, to teacher, to school leaders, to district leaders, city officials, community members, and the whole nine as I accurately share my screen. And so we offer a multifaceted, cross-functional, and intergenerational approach to truly improve educational and life outcomes for Black boys. We recognize the school system is not working well for many students, including Black boys. Our approach helps districts navigate unique regional challenges to elevate the genius of and instill positive identities in all Black boys. By grounding our approach in targeted universalism and unapologetically focusing on Black boys, our work is consequently proven to empower children and families of all backgrounds. For those who question this, we had a longitudinal study that came out of Stanford University that actually substantiated targeted universalism in a public school system in supporting one, Black boys. It actually has impacted and shown quantitatively and qualitatively how that's impacted all children as well. To create transformative change, we work with districts across 7 main areas, which I'll kind of touch on a little bit later, but go deep in particular around youth leadership and strategic communication. But what we do in these cross-functional teams, we offer an African-centered curriculum that's calibrated with Common Core that meets the high school graduation requirements. We recruit, train, and retain Black male teachers. We develop student leaders. Systems change through district collaboration. We reverse harmful policies. We engage families and communities, and we drive narrative change. By transforming the system and improving the life trajectory of kings, we are also demonstrating that the education system can truly evolve for everyone. It's important to note that really the values that we manifest, not just when we clock in, but really who we are, that our work in the beginning is really tilling the soil to ensure that we all are practicing these 5 strategic core values that make up the body of the work. And that is love. Love, our approach is first and foremost rooted in love of self, community, culture, and more. Collective will. The cavalry isn't coming to save Black boys. As members and allies of the Black community, we have a responsibility to co-create change. African-centeredness, understanding and being connected to our history and her story, community, humanity, and soul is key in shaping a positive Black identity, especially within an academic context. The 4th value, partnership. We know that our strength is in our support, and this work doesn't scale or grow without partners and allies, and we are committed to equipping them for their journey. And lastly, nothing about us without us, that our work at the core and foundation is king-centered. Black boys will always be co-creators of this work. Their voices are valued as much as the adults. So the co-conspirators, the co-creators, the co-designers of the liberatory practices that are redesigning the systems, the structures, the conditions, and creating the culture where the cures in, at the core, are our kings. For those of you who are interested, we also published a book with Dr. Naila Suad Nasir, who was formerly out of UC Berkeley, one of the vice chancellors. She's now the CEO of the Spencer Foundation. Jarvis R. Givens, a professor at Harvard, and myself co-authored a book called We Dare Say Love that goes deep around the pedagogical practices and our conspiracy of care outlined in the first 10 years of African-American male achievement in Oakland Unified School District. So I encourage you all to check that out. Our work is framed through this metaphor of healing the fish while treating the toxic ecosystem. And this is really important in the spirit of Kingmakers is not about fixing Black boys, right? That we are sending them into an institution of racism that is fully baked, that really, the longer they stay in that system, the less self-worth and academic prowess they have. And so it's really important that we address the systemic and structural environment. And so the school environment is the pond. The current pond is polluted, as we all know, and that is captured through the harsh discipline policies and practices, teachers that are unequipped to work with African-American male students. The curriculum, as we know, is biased and has negative framing towards African-American students and students of color. Probably one of the heaviest lists, evolving out of Eurocentric content from preschool through 12th grade, and we don't legitimize the Eurocentric narrative with a 10th grade ethnic studies course or Black History Month. Those are necessary yet insufficient. So we want to make sure that we rewrite curriculum with the narrative of African, Pan-African, African cosmology from preschool through 12th grade that shows up in language arts, math, science, and history. We also know that there's a discrimination and criminalization of African-American males from negative media portrayal. We'll go deeper around that a little bit later. What we do to clean the pond is really transform adults, that this is not about fixing Black children, that the heaviest lift really is the adults. And so our work in cleaning the pond is really how we engage and work with them on their journey of transformation as an individual teacher and advocate, to then engaging them on how they dismantle these institutions, these systems and structures. And what we have found is that really is a 10-year journey through policy advocacy and sunsetting policies that actually perpetuate white supremacy, to then creating racial equity and healing policies that then perpetuate the kind of condition of which that will lead to the sustainability of improved educational outcomes for Black boys, but ultimately all children. We also find it's fundamentally important as a driver and aim for change in these systems that we hire and train teachers to enable these teachers to better have a cultural understanding of African American male students so they can engage them, as well as developing Black teacher pipelines. We also see parents and families as advocates, and so parent engagement to ensure that parents are active in students' education and are empowered to advocate and support their children at school and within the district. As well as narrative change, that whoever controls the narrative in our schools, in our classrooms, and the content ultimately has the power. We have a strategy of engaging and encouraging and empowering our kings through building self-esteem, through cultural identity, and I'll show you some of the 7 accredited classes that we have through Cascade mentorship and group mentoring in our classes, as well as out of classroom time and leadership opportunities. Ultimately, a healthy pond, the cure is in the culture, and this takes what we are finding time. I think this moment in time is being accelerated through COVID-19, through what's happening in this country. And so we have an opportunity to not go back to the schools, the brick and mortar that we once know, and reimagine truly schools that are operated in service of Black, Brown, and API youth. So I want to go ahead now and move to the drivers that we use in working with these cross-functional teams. We're going to go deep around 2, but it's important to know there is no one single entry point in dismantling systems of oppression, that we have to hit it and stay in it. It's really legacy work in the way that we are working with districts across the country around rewriting curriculum, culturally relevant curriculum and pedagogy, because we know the curriculum is racially biased, that we want to increase Black male teachers. So it's important that we're working with HR and talent investment to increase teacher recruitment, training, and retention. We also know that student voice is paramount to their efficacy and ultimately their ability to advocate and navigate through these systems. And so we have a driver where we work with teams around youth voice and leadership. Community family engagement, we know that there are limited avenues for families to be engaged as partners in their child's education. I talked a little bit about narrative, and that we know the common narratives in education frame Black male students as failing. And we've really normalized and many times the failure for Black children. And so how do we flip that and have a narrative of prosperity and promise versus always talking about the problem of practice? And lastly, one of the aims and drivers that we work with school districts around is policies. And we know that the present policies were not designed to support Black male teachers frequently. And this shows up in the data when we disaggregate that by race and gender as well. So moving to now the areas, we're going to go a little bit deeper around youth voice and leadership. Now, intermediate, long-term, and ultimate impacts. And so what we've been able to track as a result of being intentional and unapologetic, from practicing at a kind of a direct service standpoint, and then working with systems to build a process where youth voice and leadership is shown at the school board, at school site councils and PTA meetings. And I'll be talking a little bit about some of those strategies, but ultimately the intermediate outcome is for students, our kings, to have access to self-advocacy and leadership opportunities for our kings. We also know that it's important for youth in terms of narrative change, that we have asset-based mindsets and narratives around Black boys and men. And this leads to improved academic achievement, sense of belonging, increased self-efficacy, positive cultural identity, and collective responsibility. And it's important that the metrics of the oppressor, the traditional metrics that we use to privilege some and disadvantage others, is that we have to equally weight metrics that are nested around cultural identity and self-efficacy as equally weighted to the traditional high school requirement or state requirement or requirements under ESSA. That's part of the productive struggle that we have to do as well, is equally weight self-efficacy and cultural identity. Ultimately, what we have found as an indicator of actualization and success greater than a GPA or greater than an ACT or an SAT score is ultimately a king who knows who he is and whose he is will go far, will feel better and go farther faster than one who knows not who he is, but might have a 5.0 GPA. With that being said, moving into the next piece that I'd like to share with you all to give some context on how we leverage youth voice, how we engage our kings and queens through non-traditional processes. I'm going to share a video, the next video, to give you some context on some out-of-the-box strategies that we use to acknowledge we hear you, to leverage the voice and reflect that back both to the system as well as building a will with our youth to take a moment and make it a movement.
He's a liar, baby. Black boy, better listen close. When your elder speaking, better have the most respect. And I'll teach you how to get it. We ain't always gotta act like opposition. No, I got the wisdom, I'ma share it with you. That's my life a movie, what you in the picture. If I got some time, I can kick it with you. Chopper to tell me what's been on your mind. Pardon my absence, we back on the grind. Getting the jump on, I'm so far behind. Breaking down barriers one at a time. I'll give you the game to strengthen your spine. Aiming for greatness, don't settle for fine. Men on a mission, don't step out of the line. Mission is vivid like king in his prime. I got the dream, you're sending the divine. Peace in the streets, no need for police. Mommy pops and love, check cash everybody. Work piled up, resume on fleek. Got my passport stamp for the land that's month. Every move that I make ain't average, bruh. Come now, king, let me sign you up. Put the whole cast over you, 2-1. Fresh Prince of Ballet, make it happen right. I'm like, what is hate, what is fire that I bring? What I speak is in my veins, in my genes. Right, wrong, stand strong in the scene. What you mean, what you mean? What is hate, what is fire that I bring? What I speak is in my veins, in my genes. Right, wrong, stand strong in the scene. What you mean, what you mean?
I read this book on Marcus Garvey and I loved it. But the crazy thing about all them schools being public is that my teachers make it seem like all that black lit was radical. Now my growth is gradual, complicated by factual way. I was born different, accustomed to different living, so now I'm code switching. Time in school is now relative, my survival imperative. Intellect is American, African, I'm inheriting. What is hate, what is fire that I bring? What I speak is in my veins, in my genes. Right, wrong, stand strong in the scene. What you mean, what you mean?
Better get back, I'm a king on my throne, I'ma spit that gold piece on my dome. Black boy, they won't leave me alone. When my people call it, better pick up the phone. Young king in the black hoodie with my fist up. Kinda mad looking, I'ma pick up where they left off. I get knocked the fire with the petrol. Hey, we just want victory. The people they pick for epiphanies. They mad that we pumping black history. If you were kidding me, I don't pretend to be. Shout out to Malcolm, shout out to Martin, shout out to Michael, shout out to Jordan, shout out to my people packed in them apartments, shout out to my people just sitting in Mars. It is hate from this fire that I bring. What I speak is in my veins, in my genes. Right, wrong, stand strong in the scene. What you mean, what you mean? King. It is hate from this fire that I bring. What I speak is in my veins, in my genes. Right, wrong, stand strong in the scene. What you mean, what you mean? King.
Chill, chill. Yeah, y'all check out the album on all platforms. Kings in the Making. That was extraordinarily dope. All of the kings you saw in that video, just so you know, came out of African American male achievement. Obasi just graduated from University of Madison, Wisconsin, is now teaching our Mastering Our Cultural Identity class at 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders in one of our elementary schools. One of the other kings, Khalil, is our media coordinator. All of the kings have since graduated from high school and are thriving and doing very well. So appreciate all of the brothers and sisters in the movement, their parents and families who've helped manifest that greatness, but now they are leading the movement as we speak. So moving forward, and hopefully this, thank you for your grace and your patience. There we go. Okay. So what I'd like to do next is really get into narrative change and youth leadership. And so some of the strategies that we use to elevate youth voice and leadership through our mantra of engage, encourage, and empower, which is something everybody can do, right? Everybody, how are you engaging Black boys versus discouraging them? How are you encouraging them versus telling them what they can't do? And ultimately, our role is to empower them to then own and be the curators of the culture. And so this is a soundtrack that we have all written for Kings. It's actually calibrated with a documentary where we're talking about fairly high concepts of institutional racism and public criticisms. Well, the kings and queens watch that documentary, and then their interpretation is this album that we use to build the movement for kings, but we also leverage it to inform teachers and families and systems leaders on what our youth are talking about and what it means to them as well. And so it's important to know that we engage kings through spoken word and hip hop. We encourage kings in all of our classes to write to themes relevant to their lives and to the Black male achievement movement locally and nationally. We share the songs with kings across schools, districts, states, and the country to build community and shared understanding of the struggle. We share the songs, podcasts, and videos with families, teachers, principals, staff, and community as a way to inform the adults what our kings have to say and build and strengthen relationships and community with those folks. As well as the soundtrack was also created to complement our video documentary series where practitioners talk about the systemic barriers of public school education, and our kings and queens listened to it and created 10 parallel tracks from talking about the same concepts, but from their perspective in words. That's all, again, located. You can download that on iTunes and Spotify, SoundCloud. Student Leadership Council, an extraordinary group, and it looks like I might have, maybe I didn't. Our Student Leadership Council, and thank you for your patience, is another example of how we engage our kings at the forefront of institutional change. Again, one of our operational values, the co-conspirator actually has to be Black boys, right? And Black children. And those folks who the system has historically underserved have to be the drivers of the liberatory design process and informing those iterations in the classroom around content, around system and structure. And so Student Leadership Council is another way that we do that. We do that through developing public speaking skills of our kings. Another opportunity on Student Leadership Council are kings supporting kings, right? Them modeling greatness by giving to others. So that is a role that Student Leadership Council that we started in Oakland Unified School District. Now the 5 districts that we're partnered with also all have Student Leadership Councils as well. But kings are empowered to work in their PTA, so speaking at their PTA meetings, so their parent meetings. Many times school-based budgeting is controlled and or approved by parent-teacher associations or school site councils. We work with our kings to understand that process, but also now to be able to speak truth to power, as well as school board meetings and city council meetings. We create a network of African-American students in positions of leadership who support each other at their school district, and national learning collaborative as well. And so we know that within these institutions of oppression, privilege perpetuates privilege because they have access to social capital, and that just moves freely. And when they decide to turn it on, it's just one phone call away. So we are intentional around expanding the social capital and social networks of kings on the block, in the neighborhood, in a feeder pattern, in a city, in a state, and across this nation. And we do that. The driver for that is our student leadership councils. And lastly, our kings have been able to present all over the country. And so it's important that we increase the opportunities that they have and hold as natural. Speaking truth to power. And they've spoken from the White House when we had our former president in office, President Barack Obama. We brought kings to speak there, to our state capitol, to state superintendents, to county superintendents, to district superintendents. But the goal is to get them speaking versus having figureheads talk and our youth are passively listening. Another domain is social media. And because now of distance learning, folks are trying to figure out how to be more sophisticated on how we are approaching social media. I realize now the slide deck that I have on my screen is a little different than the one I have on my laptop, but it's all love. Part of teaching is being adaptive and always rolling with it. But we leverage Instagram, IGTV, Twitter, Facebook. We actually, our accounts are managed by our kings, not by adults. We may provide coaching, but for the most part, right now, the real-time information of what we're seeing on social media, what we're hearing, our kings are making meaning of that and pushing that out through the platforms of IG, Twitter, Facebook, SoundCloud, and other domains. Ultimately, though, social media, we are leveraging that in working in tandem with our kings, building networks with other kings within the city, county, state, and across the nation, as well as strengthening the connection and communication between family, parents, teachers, and kings. And I think we many times as adults, parents, we're a year or months behind the innovation of our youth. And if we position them to teach us on how to leverage these domains, we actually can bend the present narrative to further engage them, but also then help perpetuate a positive narrative and narratives of promise, as well as strategies that actually connect youth with their parents and with their teachers. And so we have a social media campaign that's being driven by a street team that then works with the district street teams and student leadership councils as a way to have coordinated efforts locally and regionally and nationally to leverage social media as a way to change the narrative. Portraits of a King, and I'm seeing again, the deck that I have is not calibrated with what I'm having here. So let's bear with me as I'm making some adjustments. Let me see with my next slide. Well, there's a couple of the slides in here that I actually want to talk about that didn't make this cut, but maybe I could send my final slide deck. That it's really important to know that in order for kings to know who they are and whose they are, one of the institutional pieces that we've done in the system is offer African-centered courses. And so although this is not on your screen, I'm proud to acknowledge some of the institutional change we've been able to do in Oakland, but now it's permeating in other districts. And I know other districts have ethnic studies classes or race studies classes, but we actually have 7 accredited Common Core aligned, academically rigorous, African-centered courses. African American Power in the United States as a 10th grade history class alternative to the US history course. World's Great Men and Women of Color as an 11th grade history class as an alternative to U.S. history or world history. Mastering Our Cultural Identity, which is a G elective course, which we start as early as 3rd grade. That's our foundation course. Revolutionary Literature as an alternative to U.S. or European lit. It fulfills the 10th grade English literature graduation requirement. Arguments for Freedom, Classics Revisited, and The Depth of Hip Hop. These are all accredited courses in our milieu. We also have an extraordinary reading list that many of these books we don't have access to until we're in college. Now our kings are reading James Baldwin in 3rd grade, having exposure to John Henry Clark and other Richard Wright and Malcolm X and Ivan von Sertima. So very excited about the curriculum that we have integrated into the districts that we're working with. Continuing to move forward before I get to the closing thoughts. We have a Portraits of a King. I want to encourage you all to go to our Kingmakers of Oakland website and or Oakland Unified School District's website or Seattle Public Schools or Antioch that have their district website around the work of African-American male achievement or African-American academic leadership initiative. We are working with districts around elevating their kings to tell new stories and the power of story as a way to disrupt racial inequity. That we believe accelerates when I know who you are and you know who I am, we begin to see the humanity in each other. And so one of the strategies that we're doing to help create the conditions of which we can hear each other and heal with each other are lifting up the stories of our kings. And so we have a video documentary series, Portraits of a King, facilitated by one of our our media coordinator, King Khalil. But you can check that out on our website and Vimeo page, and I'll make sure you all have that accessible as well. As it relates to narrative change, just a few things that I'll talk about the importance of reframing the issue and clarifying the approach to drive narrative change. What we know in public school systems is they function from crisis communication and reactionary response. And the narrative is nested in Eurocentricity. So just as much as you have a strategic plan for your district, you also, if you're interested in dismantling institutions of oppression, you need to have a strategic communication plan that goes deep. And again, if you're interested, please reach out to myself. But strategy number one, again, is reframing the issue and clarify the approach to drive the narrative change. Secondly, how do you organize pathways for key audiences through leveraging your web-based platforms to have a common entry point, and then creating FAQs and other things that begin to socialize people around the language of equity versus you ask 10 people what the definition of structural racism is or what equity is, and they all have different approaches. And so this is really important around communication because, again, whoever controls the narrative has the power. Another strategy is putting kings front and center. If your narrative is a bunch of teachers and adults talking, it's probably the wrong narrative. You want to have at center your youth. So putting kings front and center, making it more than a local educational issue. And now is the time. We're seeing, as a result of white supremacy and the residual effect of structural racism, we have a moment in time to never go back to the sort of system and structure that we were working in, and really to reimagine systems and structures and create conditions where the cure is in the culture. And so it's important that we know that in order to go global, you have to understand the local context as well. And the last strategy is really turning advocates into champions and making sure that the cavalry is not coming to save us, that we actually have all that we need. It's really an issue of will and organization. And so if we could take the E out of ego and begin to till the soil, getting to know who we are and whose we are, and building the condition of healing, we will move through this and reimagine a system in service of Black boys and people of color. And so in conclusion, we are in a crisis of humanity in schools. You cannot teach those you do not love. Institutions are malleable. Policies created segregation and inequality. Policies can be used to create something different. There is still a place for hope, even as we recognize the pervasive and structural aspects of race. Our kings must be at the table of co-conspiring and redesigning a school system in service of them. Nothing about us without us. Grounding our work in history of race and equity in education is going to be important for whatever we do moving forward. Building an understanding of systemic oppression. Yes, there's work that we can do to transform ourselves, but these systems outlive all of us. So there's the personal transformation, simultaneously, how we're dismantling this system to reimagine new systems and structures and create conditions, again, where the cure is in the culture. We must address the historical trauma and implicit bias. So everything must, we talk about the intersectionality of SEL and academics, really that has to be embedded in healing. How are we, we are a nation, a traumatized nation, primary and secondary. And so in moving back, in moving forward, we have to think about healing processes. And if we look to our indigenous culture and people, those routines and rituals are inherent in the culture. That is going to have to permeate the new systems and structures that liberate us ultimately. Two more things. There's still a place for hope, even as we recognize, excuse me, I said that one before, the one on my screen, cultivating educational leadership skills to build asset mindsets in others, implement and norm family engagement for equity conditions and lead a family engagement for equity of vision. And lastly, prioritizing continuous and learning. It's interesting that we are a learning institution, yet we are probably some of the slowest learners in our system that are replicating things that we did 100 years ago. So we have to practice the same things we're wanting our teachers to do, or holding our children accountable for. The system, the school board, the central office has to be redesigned, and daily reflection and continuous learning has to accelerate how we reimagine a system in service of children of color. And so with that being said, again, grateful for the opportunity. Hopefully some of this information was substantial for you, and appreciate all of your attentiveness in this hour of presenting to you. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and kick it back up to Brother Brian.
Brother Chris, I appreciate you, brother. And you brought a lot. You dropped a lot of dope presentation. You know, as some of us know, this is actually your second time coming in as a speaker to one of our summer conferences. You came in a couple of years ago for the 23rd annual. And ever since then, I've been kind of following and closely watching your work. I've been to the Fall Forum in Oakland every subsequent year since then to kind of connect and also bring back some of the work that you are doing out there to kind of inspire and add to the work that we're doing here in Palm Beach. When you talk about curriculum development and some of the courses that have been developed out there, also we've developed similar courses that are actually available throughout the state here in Florida. So thank you for the inspiration. Thank you for the just the knowledge and the expertise that you brought that can add to our work. One of the things I always push, you know, as Black men, just moving in solidarity. When we see greatness in each other, that we take that greatness, that we try to learn and draw from each other to build and add to the work that I'm doing. I'm never intimidated when I see a brother that's on a whole nother level, because that inspires me to try to get to that level. And when I first transitioned into this role back in like 2016, I saw the things that you were doing, and that inspired me to get to that level. So thank you again, and I'm just honored that you accepted my invitation twice, that you've come right back to Palm Beach to kind of bring in and drop knowledge and spread the wisdom and the love and the things that you're doing out there in Oakland, that we can bring great work here, that we can expand and grow the work here. So thank you again, Brother Chris.
No time, brother. Thank you. And
all right. No, I'm sorry, you was going to say something. I'm sorry.
Yeah, really just all praise to those who dealt with far more with far less. So I give thanks to our forefathers and foremothers who endured immeasurable impacts on their life, on their livelihood. And so I'm just grateful to have the baton to run far, run fast, and actually pass that baton to many more extraordinary people that will go farther and further than us. So thank you for just engaging me, brother. I'm humbled and honored.
Absolutely. So Brother Chris, I got a few follow-up questions for you. You know, I listened to a lot of things that you were saying in the presentation. A lot of it hit home. Just watching the presentation, looking at the videos, I saw Brother Bacard, Brother Ernest, some of the brothers I've seen and observed their work, and it's amazing, dope work. All right. So one of my questions is this, you're talking about, again, this is transformative work. Definitely. It's gonna take a minute, you mentioned that, probably like a 10-year time frame to kind of transition, to kind of sunset policies that have perpetuated racism and build up policies that does the complete opposite, anti-racist work, anti-racist policies that are inclusive, that make sure that they address the needs of Black and brown and children of color, to make sure that we have an equitable, just school district. And also, one of the things that you mentioned, that we're within this window right now, that we have an opportunity not to go back to the same mess and not to continue the same mess, that we can create something new. I keep saying throughout our presentations, throughout this conference, now is the time to create a new normal, right? So to be able to carry out, this kind of work and this transformative thing, we wanted to not transforming school sites or transforming individual classrooms. We're talking about transforming an entire system, all right? Because right here in Palm Beach County, we have some schools that are amazing, that are doing some dope work, but we want that work to spread throughout the entire system and let it be embedded within the system, just like racism is embedded in the system. Let's do some work that we can embed and create a whole system. What is the mindset and how do we build capacity around that mindset with educators and educational leaders in order to make this happen? So how do we start this work, or how do we even progress this work as far as the mindsets?
Yeah, and great question. And I think during moments of chaos and crisis, actually, you can accelerate what I had quoted around 10 years within the typical cadence of disillusionment, of privilege. I think right now we actually can go farther faster. And so in terms of mindsets, I mean, I think a few things. Well, one, I think how do we I think that kind of identifying, on some level, some sort of a survey of our communities and landscapes to understand who are those folks that actually have that mindset, right? And how do we begin to mobilize and elevate the people that actually see the light and understand? And then how do we organize them in such a way that they begin to co-construct with those who this system have historically underserved? So again, I've made reference on several occasions, nothing about us without us. So we need folks that actually are, you talk to about a couple of schools that actually are figuring it out. They're accelerating academic performance for children of color, that have some great adult learning modalities, and how they're differentiating instruction and creating engaged communities. Really, those are centers of which then we should be learning and informing what that work could look like. And so I think part of it is so doing some sort of kind of asset mapping, understanding where is greatness amongst us, that folks that get it, and then beginning to then co-construct processes where intergenerational and cross-functional individuals get to look at data, get to learn on where it's working and then where it's not working. And on that journey, they're looking at their own, where they at with regards to their own transformation and where they need to be, while you're beginning to build a common language, a common framework. This takes time, but it can be, it's happening, and it's happening in different places. And so I say this to say, so starting with some sort of asset mapping, beginning to align intergenerational groups of folks, ensuring that those students, families, and communities furthest away from opportunity are actually at the core, the epicenter of design. They should be driving the focus groups, driving the liberatory design processes, and iterating what are those strategies as they identify that they feel they need, that actually will allow them a stronger sense of self, a positive cultural identity, and what they will be able to do in terms of meeting the academic bodies of work. And so it really is a community engagement strategy, internal to the district, external to the district, that you just stay on how do you build momentum? What is the narrative? What is the story we're telling? How do people begin to see the humanity in each other? You do that through beginning just to create healing spaces where people can listen to each other, and even knowing we don't even know how to listen. Like, we're always, somebody's talking, I'm already plotting my response. Like, knowing what constructive listening looks like, feels like, right? And then being able then to actually practice processes of healing. I think a lot of times this work is difficult and it stalls out because, you know, we have these different transactional linear approaches that when the shit hits the fan, excuse my language, and I've done shared my bias, then either we fight, argue, or we retreat back. We need to figure out processes that are nested in ways of healing that allow us through the pain, through whatever side it may be, the perpetrator or the person who it's been received on, but we need a healing process. And so it is a multifaceted approach. It is complex, but the way that you innovate is bringing people together. And so having healing processes, bringing elders into the place, bringing youth into the place, understanding the historical context, kind of globally, how did we get here, nationally, locally, and then beginning to reimagine and have a place to even envision on what you want, and then just design, right? And then, all right, well, this is what we want to do. What do we need to do? How do we need to organize? What are the systems? What are the structures? We got to create those conditions. In stewarding that process and shepherding that process, greatness is inevitable. And so all that to say, those are some of the things. So there's the individual transformation that has to be calibrated with the systemic and structural transformation. And ideally, when the stars align, that's when you can accelerate academic performance, reimagining systems of liberation, and schools that are thriving and districts that are thriving. So I'll stop there.
Oh, that's good. No, thank you for that response. And I just like how you definitely mentioned a multifaceted approach that is going to take collaboration and partnerships with our communities, and also making sure that we keep students at the center of these conversations. You mentioned that in the presentation, and that's one of the things in some of the circles and conversations that I'm a part of, is just making sure that we have a student voice. Even within this conference, I made sure that one of our presentations is students' voices, the state of education from a Black student's perspective. We make decisions all around kids, but sometimes we forget to bring kids within the proximity of our conversations.
That's right.
So that's key. And also, this is going to take time, and this is a multifaceted approach that are going to take steps. Excellent response. So thank you. Another question. Right now we're looking at protests like I've probably never seen, and definitely in my lifetime, worldwide, in response to police brutality, and which is one of the many symptoms of white supremacy and racism in this country. And it's a definitely new shift of energy. And as you said, that we definitely need to take advantage of in our spaces of education, right?
Yes.
And we're watching history repeat itself. We're definitely watching history repeat itself. I've had conversations with people that are saying that this is looking like Red Summer 1919, possibly, potentially. We're looking at 1967. I had a colleague that said that this is reminiscent when she was living in Newark in 1967. We saw, more in a smaller scale. This happened back in 1991 down in LA. And we're continually reliving a nightmare, but we need to kind of break that cycle of this perpetual nightmare that is affecting everybody. Yes, it's definitely directly affecting the Black communities, but we share the same fabric of society, so therefore it impacts, and everybody should be affected in some kind of way, shape, form, or fashion. So what role do we have in education to inspire this change and break this cycle?
Well, our role, it is a moment of definition for public school education, for educators, where really we have to be the curators of our culture in such a way that how our proximity to the people who we have least served, we have to figure out how do we increase that proximity. How do we figure out ways then to engage, encourage, and ultimately empower them so they are designing, they are co-conspiring, they are creating what the new normal is going to be.
Absolutely.
Teachers really have to, I think, on many levels, let go of what they thought teaching was and take more of a facilitative role. and a co-construction role. Like what powerful opportunity as right now, senior leadership teams and school boards, principals and network superintendents, they are thinking about what distance learning and blended learning is doing. What if they're all city councils and student leaderships and Black student unions and Rasa studies and API clubs? What if we now, institutional leaders, were facilitating youth to reimagine what school is for them? I mean, on an entrepreneurial standpoint, they're learning, they're learning history. They're learning public policy. They're learning academic discourse. They're learning writing. All these a myriad of different skills. And so I think we just have to take a very different look at the problem a little bit differently. And how do we help curate space with those folks who we have struggled with because of the institutional barriers and our lack of not knowing? We really have to let go and help. How do we create places and spaces where those folks who haven't had access now have access? How do we redistribute power and control to those who haven't had that and allow them to co-design what school will be when we come back in the fall? And so, I mean, I think it's just a different cadence, and it's a different approach on top of now just, because of distance learning as well, and the idea that we may not be going back to an 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Monday through Friday school scenario, that, how do we leverage technology and other outdoor spaces where we can be in relationship with community? How, from a community school standpoint, where we empower those culture keepers that actually have deep relationships with children and families that we have struggled with, how do we anoint them to help co-conspire in the education and support in their neighborhoods, be it through churches or be it through frats or other areas? And I think it's a fundamental redesign where school, there are no, there's no walls, right? There are no limits. And ultimately, I mean, the strategy around this would be deep from a municipality and a city standpoint, but imagine a city, a region really thinking about their children, like how we all play a role in educating, engaging, encouraging, empowering our children. And public health is thinking about their lens of serving the health needs of a community, but through an educational standpoint of children and families, through juvenile justice, through social service, through all these different domains. And so, I mean, I think that would be my call to action is definitely, we can't go back, but we have to be audacious. We have to be out of the box, and we have to look to where our blind spots and then invite those folks into the blind spots as co-creators, not advising, but they need to be, co-conspirators and co-creating what the lesson plan is, what the school looks like. But that would be kind of, again, the complex approach to kind of the new normal of how we look to each other and move differently.
Yeah, for sure. And that actually, when you, I was going to have another question about how do we, transform education through the COVID, and you kind of tied it in right in that question, and just kind of responded perfectly right there, just about just reimagining. 2020 has definitely been, it's been a unique year, and it's presented its challenges, but out of these challenges, we have an opportunity to reimagine, recreate, and restructure our systems. And in our spaces, we're talking about our educational systems. And this is the perfect opportunity if we're talking about creating a just, fair, equitable, level playing field in education. We have that window right now. And to our audience, again, what's reimagined, what's time to recreate a new normal. And we can start having these conversations, and we can start creating those blueprints. And what does that look like in our space of education, to make sure that we're bringing in the cultural perspectives and experiences, the norms of all of our students, that we're tearing down policies that have inhibited success of our students, and creating academic outcomes that we can predictable academic outcomes based off of race, ethnicity, gender, etc. And out of this chaos, there's order out of chaos, order out of chaos. So we have this opportunity. So Brother Chris, once again, I thank you for joining us in these conversations and then leading this conversation around educational transformation based off of some of the things that you have experienced and based on some of the things that you have implemented out there in Old Town. So we appreciate y'all here on the East Coast, down in Florida. I'm looking forward to whenever we can start to move forward with our fall forums once again. I don't know what it's going to look like this year. But Brother Chris, I appreciate you. And without shame, I'm going to say I love you, brother. And I thank you for everything.
I love you, brother. Thank you for the opportunity. Continue to shine that bright light. And I'm just humbled and honored to be a part of the community. And any way I can be of support and service, please don't hesitate. Yeah, I am because we are. We are because I am. May the circle be unbroken. And this circle ain't going to break, brother.
Okay.
Right on.
All right. Thank
you
y'all, participants. All right, you too. Thank you, participants, for watching. We hope that you have enjoyed all our presentations and moving forward. There are much more, and there's much more work to come moving forward. Peace.
Peace.